So
Yep.
you, how do you focus between running an entirely different business, which is the acquisition of assets and all the operations needed to service that versus focusing on a tech platform? Because historically, real estate developers and even private equity funds don't have tech DNA. And you
Yeah.
see this in every
Definitely.
industry. They try to build their own technology stack out. And I see property management firms, I see large private equity funds who don't have the DNA trying to build a tech solution. You guys are sort of coming at it from the other angle. So what's your thoughts on the way you're doing it? And what's your advice to other PropTech startups too?
So I'll let Ben take it in a sec. But one thing I would want to say, which relates back to your point a second ago about the analogy of using a third-party website or application, is that you do sort of take risk if you are entrusting someone else and you're putting yourself on, their product or operation or something. And for us, that's very analogous to the way that we add value to our consumer. We're not just enabling a transaction. We're also pre-vetting a home before you buy it. So if we were to say to any landlord, we will let you use our product and co-invest with one of our customers, we want to first make sure that we have vetted that home and that we would buy it ourselves before we allowed a customer to co-invest with us. So that's one of the added benefits. It's not only good to own more of the value chain, I think it's actually a way for us to offer a better product to the customer.
So to jump in
so
there,
that's why it's iterative between the two.
So to jump in there, in some ways, what you're saying is that I'm so confident my product works and it can provide value. I'm willing to put my own money in, and I want to make sure that any partner on our platform, there's a stamp of approval here. This is good enough for me to own, and I'm willing to own it. So that's what you were saying. That customer empathy is a very valuable thing to have. It can only really come from having skin in the game, as they say.
Agreed. And we want to be able to tell customers, we are buying this house with you. We have pre-vetted, we essentially evaluate homes prior to customers having the opportunity to choose to rent a place and own a place with us. And so we do tell them, this is a home that we have evaluated and think is a good investment. And that's important for us to be able to do.
Yeah, lots of people.
We often actually, we often will actually tell customers, this is not a good home. For example, a house might slip through our vetting process, and it turns out that it's still in construction or something like that. And we actually will tell the customer, hey, this is not a good home. It's not finished, or the roof is missing. You should probably, check out a different house. And so that actually builds a lot of trust. We actually tell, because we're not just a random real estate agent that says, oh yeah, just buy any house. This one's great for you, and just try to collect your commission, right? As Spencer mentioned, because we have skin in the game, we have a real interest in making sure that every home that our customer ends up renting or buying, is a good asset that will appreciate in value.
Yeah, understood. So if a key part of your business is making sure you pre-vet the tenant, basically you're going into a partnership, a business partnership with the consumer, with the tenant, because you are buying the home. Then how does this work? How do you pre-vet them? And how do you not just pre-vet them, how do you pre-vet the home itself? You've got two things you need to ensure are at a high enough worthy quality.
Yeah. Spencer can answer the question on the real estate vetting. On the customer vetting, we use a pretty standard tenant tenant background check. So we'll do a credit check, a criminal background check, eviction search and all that. So they need to have generally a 680 credit score and above, which is what FICO deems as average. And they need to have a good income to rent ratio. So typically income is 3 times the rent, good income to debt to income ratio. It obviously can't be over leveraged on the amount of personal debt they have. Those are really the main criteria. As long as you have sufficient income and not too much debt and good credit,
so as we
generally
dive
a creditworthy
into that,
customer.
We'll dive into that.
Customer.
We'll dive into that before we discuss how to vet real estate, right? What do you think about the current standards for vetting consumers? The whole idea of a FICO score. This is a methodology that's been in place for a pretty long time. I'd call it ancient in the world of PropTech. Is that something you stand behind, or do you feel there's opportunities to improve the vetting of tenants themselves?
It's a good question. We have, weekly, very heated arguments about whether the credit score should be moved upwards or downwards. Because obviously there's this balance where the stricter your credit requirements, the harder it is, or the more expensive it is to acquire customers. And there's this very careful balance to be struck. I think generally we found that credit score. I mean, we spoke a lot of the credit agencies too, and they've said we've thrown like billions of dollars at like trying to develop better credit models, and like this is the best they've come up with.
Right.
And I think there's some truth to that. There's a lot of very smart people working on improving the FICO scoring model, but like, there's a lot of data out there, right? Like they have so much data is analyzed to come up with something good. So if you think that someone has kind of solved this, by now, and there's like startups like SoFi, right, trying to re-innovate the scoring model. I think like it's generally quite accurate. Like we have enough data now to analyze rent defaults, and we have everyone's credit scores, and we're monitoring them on a real-time basis. And we have generally discovered that's pretty indicative of someone's default risk. Like the lower someone's score, the more often there are defaults. We don't have too many, but of the people that have defaulted or at least like missed a payment or two or been a couple of days late, they generally have lower credit score. So I think there is correlation. I think it's relatively accurate.
That's right. And there's a temptation for entrepreneurs, especially tech people, right, to disrupt the status quo, but sometimes the status quo works. Frustrating
Right.
as it is, how basic the methodology appears, right? It works for a reason. There's no point fighting a wave. So that makes a lot of sense. Now, Spencer, let's talk about the real estate side. How do you guys vet that? Because you've got two things to do, vet the tenant and vet the real estate. How does that work?
Yeah, exactly. So our approach is on the real estate side, is to find something that is not only a good investment and that we deem to be a standalone good investment, but also something that is actually a good fit for our potential customers. And so there is a product we're offering, and the product we think is applicable to everyone in the market, but obviously there's a sweet spot of a consumer, and you could call that, a starter home, if you will. And so, we start by essentially looking for something like the median house, right? Because that's basically going to be the best way to provide customers with what they're looking for and the ability to access our product. But on the strictly investment side of things, we look at things from a traditional macro economic and fundamental analysis perspective. And that's the things you'd hear about most home buyers or renters would be familiar with in terms of quality of schools, commutability, safety, et cetera. And then we also have some more proprietary factors that we have developed in-house that we layer onto that fundamental analysis. And that's things like the amenities in the area that we have found to actually be good indicators of value over time, which are not always necessarily priced into the market. So the balance of it and the base for us is, fundamentally, are you in a safe area where people can commute to work and, send their kids if they have them to school? And then we like to try to get a little bit more advanced after that. But we definitely start with the fundamentals and go from there.
So it sounds like what you're saying is there's a lot of data you ingest. You build it on the most common sense observations, such as the safety or the commute to work, or is this an area where you can send your children to school if you have any? Where's the human element? Is this all done by data? Are there spreadsheets here that simply binary say yes and no, or is a human involved? What's the balance?
Yeah, so a human is involved in, not every single home we're looking at. And every home we acquire, of course, there's a human and several involved in the acquisition. But we actually evaluate more homes than we buy because we want to give our customers a chance to view more potential opportunities. So we do what we'd call an initial screening using our quantitative models. And that's, 99% plus, purely quantitative, no one is involved. The second we have a customer who is interested in a property, that's when we start to have someone who's, actually viewing a home with a customer. If we do a viewing and we're showing customer, we're also viewing it ourselves and looking around and seeing, okay, does this make sense? Or, is there potential expense here? Do we need to upgrade this? Do we need to upgrade that, et cetera? So it starts out, I'd say the initial screen is purely from our quantitative models, and then there's a human element to it. And then, of course, when we're building those quantitative models, there's a lot of, human, I'd say, input that goes into that. And when we go to each new market, we need to educate ourselves and then understand what are the important factors locally that we think we need to incorporate, and how do we weight those different factors. And then from there, once we've gone through that education process, we continually refine it.
Do you think we can get to a point where we don't need a human involved? Or if not a human involved, do you think we can get to a point where we don't need to visit the property itself? Can all this be done, for example, remotely through virtual tours?
I'd say eventually, but years away. I think based on the diverse geographies that we're working with, we're not all just going. We're not going to a newly built community where everything is perfectly homogenous between the properties, where everything's brand new. You have perfect information. I think in the future state, absolutely, there's nothing that we're doing in person that can't be done virtually or, in an automated way. But I think just, the infrastructure of, the age of communities, the age of homes, the connectivity that we would have to those areas, make it such that at this point in time, there's going to be a human element involved for a while, but that will decrease over time. And then eventually, we're hopeful in a future state, it's all virtual. But we're not betting on that to make our business work.
Right. And
yeah, I do think we're getting quite close, though, to the point, Spencer mentioned. I do think we're definitely getting quite close to the point where you won't need a human to manually diligence the house. Open Door is obviously the company that's done this the most successfully. Their founders actually invested in us, so we've pretty good, good-ish understanding of how they do things. They're obviously transacting on what's their volume, Spencer? They're doing tens of thousands of homes a month. I can't remember the number exactly, but they're buying and selling a ton of homes every day, and they're doing this at scale profitably. So I definitely think we're getting closer.
Not just at scale, they're putting the traditional approach of home buying to shame, really, right? Where endless visits back and forth, and frankly, this is what it comes down to. In my gut, this feels like the right price, so I'll bid for this. Here you've got these iBuyers, which is what we call them, right? Folks like Zillow and Open Door, who can just ruthlessly crunch the numbers and make bids everywhere. Of course, there is a human involved still to this point, in the very last stages, just to check. What is your thought on the whole iBuying model for homes? In some ways, you have crazy algorithms, and you have hedge funds able to transact on securities like stocks and other liquid assets. Will we get there for real estate where it will be the same fundamental technology, or is this always going to be an emotional process because there's a tenant living there?
I think the iBuyers have made an enormous step to sort of creating a tradable market of homes, but I again think that because so many homes in the U.S. are essentially so old, you don't have these newly built communities. I think newly built communities are the ones that can be readily traded, and that's where you could actually have an exchange where people are trading homes. I think as you get to assets that look less and less alike, and maybe that's where the emotion comes in, as you say, it's more and more difficult to actually have a kind of marketable security type of transaction, like you're saying, hedge fund style trading.
Yeah, I personally think the world will go in that direction, but as you said, the infrastructure needs to exist. You need to be able to collect the data. It's like we had this conversation 30, 40, 50 years ago when people were trading stocks. Someone would have just thought we were ridiculous for saying, trading will happen in milliseconds and it will be real time and there'll be data. It was done in such an inefficient basis in the past. And we've seen this happen in many, many different industries, even with startup investments. Now there's also legislation allowing the normal everyday investor access to this asset class, especially as companies stay private longer. Then how do you invest in companies? And if that's happening, then real estate, surely being the world's largest asset class, presents a fabulous opportunity. But it's an exciting time. Whoever does unlock this definitely unlocks the Holy Grail. And I don't think you can crown a winner. It's easy to assume a company like a Blackstone, KKR, huge private equity funds that have great technology and data scientists, within. Even they, I don't think, can be crowned the winner just yet. It's open to anyone. So
I totally agree with that, and I think you mentioned one winner. I wouldn't be surprised if it's several and looking in different forms, right? Like there's Open Doors doing something that changes the way people transact on homes. We're doing something that changes the way people occupy homes and own/rent and occupy, et cetera, all into one. And there's not necessarily something that is conflicting between those two business models. So it might actually be a sort of whirlwind of companies or products or trends that enable it.
So walk me through how you guys think about geographic expansion. This is something every PropTech startup company, actually not just PropTech startups, but real estate companies and funds have to figure out. Each location is very different. We had the founder of Bedley on recently on another episode, and we went into great depth around the whole concept of nailing your market geography before you go somewhere else. But real estate also is just real estate, right? We want to make it easily tradable. How do you guys think about that? What's your view?
So I actually look at, well, as you know, our team is primarily located in New York, and then we have local operations in each market where we're present. And I'd actually look at a new market expansion or launch or setting up shop similar to the way we vet real estate. So we, one, not only need to make sure there's product market fit, but two, we need to make sure it's a good fundamental investment. And so, each time we launch a new market, we essentially say, okay, what are the fundamentals of that market in terms of macro and housing fundamentals? And then what are the kind of added inputs that we think are important for driving value and that we think are maybe not reflected in a market in a given time? And then we'll basically say at that point we're launching a market, look at maybe 25 plus, start to narrow it down over time, have that debate internally, and then we'll go where we think there's that good balance of product market fit, stable investment returns with obviously some upside. So it's no different than the way we're actually vetting individual homes conceptually. It's just, a different potential universe that we're looking at, different data set that we're analyzing. And then, the execution is starting fundamentally and layering on from there. And we refine that over time with each new market.
Got it. So you're building processes internally, basically. But it sounds like your mindset is one where you don't want to overcomplicate it. It is just an activity, a process, an operation, just like you would buy real estate.